Hello, everyone. My name is Nathan Robinson, and I'm super excited to be here today as part of Save the Meds live lessons to talk to you about engaging a global audience in marine science. This journey is going to take us in over a bit of a wild ride. We'll be talking about pulling straws out of sea turtles' noses and giant squid at the bottom of the ocean. So I hope you'll all hang around and enjoy the talk. I'm going to start by just posing the question of why do we need to engage global audiences in marine science? And I'm sure many of you know it's due to the scale of the problems that the ocean is currently facing. The biggest threats that the ocean is facing today are the threats of climate change, plastic pollution, and unsustainable fisheries. These aren't localized issues. These are issues that are universal in all the oceans of the world. There's no single water body, no single habitat in the ocean that is spared from the effects of these issues. Now, this provides a problem in the fact that the problem is so widespread, but it also has a silver lining to the cloud, which is the problems are so global that they are very much global in the sense that we all take part in potentially in these problems. When we're talking about the issue of plastic pollution in the oceans, well, if we're individuals that are using single-use plastics and can't say if we're recycling these in the necessary places, then we could be part of that problem. If you eat fish and you don't know where it's being sourced from or where it's being sourced sustainably, then you might also be part of the problem. Now, the blessing is that means that all we need to do to fix these problems is change individuals' minds. And we all think of ourselves as individuals who can change our opinion on subjects. And if given the right information, we might change our course. So all we need to start doing is changing the opinions of wide-scale individuals on a global scale. The next question is, so how do we do this? Well, as a scientist, I have to say that we are probably the people who are best suited to collect the data on the issues facing the world's oceans today. We're the people on the front lines who are collecting the values that say this is how temperature in the ocean is changing, or this is how we have fewer and fewer fish in these parts of the world. But we generally do a terrible job of actually communicating that information. The general idea with science and scientists is we collect the data, we write it up in a scientific manuscript. It gets read by a few hundred to maybe a few thousand like-minded individuals, and that's it. But if we want to start creating behavioral change on a wide scale, we need a different way to start getting that information out there. And luckily, there's a perfect platform, and that platform is social media. And I'm going to talk my personal part of the stories that I'm going to be telling you about today by telling you about an incident back in 2015 where I was able to enact a global change and saw global change through communicating science via social media. I was working as a researcher, sea turtle biologist in Costa Rica, and I was invited by Texas A&M University on an expedition to study the sea turtles on the Pacific coast of the country. Now, personally, I was looking for epibionts, which are the tiny little animals that live on other animals. So in the case of sea turtles, these are barnacles that live on sea turtles, or little animals that encrust these things. Every animal that we were bringing onto the boat, I would check over, looking for these little epibionts and collect what I needed or study or quantify or categorize what I wanted to study. But it meant that every single individual, every single turtle, I was looking over and scrutinizing them very closely. And one of the individuals, literally as we were pulling it out of the water, I noticed something surprising. I actually saw something lodged inside its nostril. At first, I had no idea what it was. None of the people on the boat had any idea. I thought it might be a little tube worm. Sometimes you get these little encrusting worms that you can find on the shells of sea turtles, and I thought maybe this is a very unfortunate turtle that's managed to get one of these little worms with a shell kind of encrusted inside its nostril. We could tell it was obstructing the breathing way, so we decided to try to remove it. However, when we decided to remove that item, as I'm sure many of you know, it wasn't a tube worm after all. It was actually a plastic straw. In fact, it was this plastic drinking straw. A lot of people call me a hoarder for collecting this, but I think it's important. One day it'll go in a museum or something like that. And that whole event of me removing the straw was recorded by a friend of mine, Chris Figner, who put that video online. And overnight, it went viral. The impact was huge. And if you look up the video now, I think it has, there's a couple of different versions, but combined they have over 100 million views. And it's become, the sea turtle straw kind of issue has become so big that it's become a meme, which I guess this is the perfect way to suggest it's going worldwide. It got picked up by news stories. It got picked up by media outlets. It was mentioned in TV shows and sitcoms all over the world. It's inspired documentaries. But the biggest impact beyond the views is the change in behavior that we started to see because of this video. All of a sudden, we started seeing all these organizations, kind of outlets that would traditionally use straws, transitioning away from plastic straws to paper straws or no straws. People started saying, no straw, please, when they're into restaurants. And we started seeing this huge change in how people were dealing with plastic. And in this instance, it was focused on straws. It's a very easy thing to kind of take out of your life. So it became a centerpiece to these movements. But it's become a platform that's enabled us to start larger discussions about other plastic items and other things that might be in the sea. And I'm sure very few people would argue that since that video came out, we've actually seen an increase in awareness and a reduction in the amount of, say, plastic straws and things like this that are actually being used worldwide just due to the changes in behaviors of individual people. Now, that event had a huge impact on me and everyone who was involved with it, both kind of personally, but also professionally. I started thinking, as a marine biologist, how can I, as a marine biologist, and I know there are threats that the ocean is facing, how can I use my skill set to start making a positive change for the oceans? And I decided, well, I've got to start communicating my science better. I can't just publish it in a scientific article and leave it at that. I've got to start trying to conduct science or share science in a way that we're going to start reaching out to an audience that honestly, I believe, wants this information, wants to live in a better, healthier, cleaner world with cleaner oceans. So I decided to start focusing my research on conducting projects that could answer important ecological questions, but at the same time provided a platform that you could start discussing important issues facing the oceans and get people engaged. So projects that had a bit of a wow factor, that started getting people excited about marine science and started people talking. And what I'd like to do for the rest of the time I have you today is to talk a little bit about three of these different projects where I've been trying to conduct kind of engaging science that captures the imagination of as many people as possible. The first project I'm going to talk to you about is, we'll call it the Turtle Cam project. This is where we're deploying cameras onto sea turtles to get a first-person perspective on how they live their lives. The second project I'm going to talk to you about is how we are building hyper-realistic digital 3D models of various shark species to potentially change people's perception of sharks. And then lastly, I'm going to talk to you about a project where we're deploying cameras at the bottom of the ocean to find the deep and mysterious critters we see down there. Now, that first project, the Turtle Cam project, was born out of the idea of, has anyone ever dreamt about what it's like to swim through the oceans like a sea turtle? This idea of being completely free and gliding through the oceans. And I'm sure there's countless marine biologists and just ocean enthusiasts in general who can say, yes, 100% agree. We took that idea and kind of made it reality. Essentially, we started designing these cameras we call turtle cams. I have one right here, which is actually a diving camera, a paralens dive camera, that's attached to a couple of other bits of equipment that you can deploy onto the shell of a sea turtle. And then after 3 or 4 hours, the whole system pops off, floats to the surface, and then we're able to recover the camera and access all the footage it contains. Now, the footage that we get from these cameras is incredible. You really do get that first person / first turtle view of how a turtle sees the world. You can see them breathing, you can see them soaring through the oceans. And from a science perspective, it's giving us some really valuable data. It lets us know what are sea turtles feeding on, where are their important habitats. We've actually found a lot about sea turtles' social behavior. Prior to this, we didn't really think of sea turtles, or at least juvenile sea turtles, as being very social animals. They're not mating, they're juveniles, so why would they interact? But from our turtle cam footage, what we're actually seeing is a turtle can barely swim past another turtle without coming by to check it out. Sometimes that might be an aggressive interaction, it might be a bit territorial. You'll see one turtle kind of going to chase off the other one. Sometimes it's actually a very, call it positive interaction. You'll literally see two sea turtles, maybe one will come up and just sit on top of the other, or they'll rub heads for a second or something like that, and then swim off in their own ways. And we're still trying to figure out what that all means. But whatever, that footage is very engaging. We've been able to share it in several platforms and get lots of people excited and talking about these projects. But from a conservation perspective as well, when you can think of how important or how impactful it would be to see the threats faced by these animals from their own perspective. When we talk about the biggest threat faced by sea turtles today is fisheries bycatch. So this is sea turtles caught in nets, not nets designed to catch sea turtles, nets designed to catch food we like, but sea turtles are accidentally getting caught in those nets. Think, if I just explain that, it has one impact, or some impact. But if you can see it from the perspective of the sea turtle, it really helps you empathize with what these animals are going through. Same if we're talking about plastic. If you can actually see firsthand a sea turtle swimming through the ocean, biting and eating plastic as it goes, and how it struggles to separate, say, a jellyfish or a plastic bag or something like that, it provides an incredibly powerful tool for engaging people in the problems that the ocean faces. Because all of a sudden, we're seeing these issues from the perspective of the turtles, the perspective of the animals that are really being impacted by these issues. The next project that I wanted to talk to you about is how we're building these hyper-realistic digital models of sharks. Now, sharks are often kind of portrayed in the media as these hyper-aggressive apex predators that are hunting everything and anyone they come across in the oceans. And for anyone who works with sharks or who swam with sharks, we all know this isn't true. In fact, if you go snorkeling or swimming with a shark, you'll realize they're actually a very passive, calm, relaxing. They're generally more interested in what's going on or scared of you than hunting any human that's in the water. We start thinking, so how do we start selling this story? How do we start portraying these animals not as hyper carnivores, but as the kind of more peaceful part of nature animals that they are? And I started collaborating with an organization called Digital Life 3D. And Digital Life 3D have developed a camera they call the Beast Cam. And essentially, it's a big array of multiple GoPros, and they all take photos simultaneously. And whatever you have in the middle of the circle of GoPros, you can then build a 3D image of, a fully digitized 3D model, because you have the view of that object from all the different sides. So what we started doing is we started taking that footage kind of into the wild, and we made our own beast cam of people in the water, scuba divers, and we waited in an area where we know we have lots of sharks until a shark swam through the center. We all had our GoPros pointing in the same direction, and we all got footage at the same time, and then we managed to use that to create this 3D model of a shark. And I actually have a 3D printout of that shark that we were able to capture that day. This is a Caribbean reef shark. We've actually built several other models since then. Now, the model that we create is freely available on Digital Life's website online, and they can be used for several things. So we can use it for research. We can start to study the hydrodynamics of these animals. So what is the effect of drag as they swim? We can also start to look at, we can also use them for, educational purposes. As I said, these models are online. You can interact with them. You can look up close. It gives you an insight of what these animals look like or swim like in the water. But an angle that I find very interesting is we can also start to use the data that we're collecting in more widely publicized media, things like movies, computer games, things like this. If you think of a shark in a computer game or a movie, generally it's a 3D shark that an animator has built. They've sketched, they've designed, they've created this 3D model. But if you have this preconceived notion of a shark as a dangerous animal, you're naturally going to make that shark a little bit more aggressive as it swims. And then that can change the perceptions of people who are watching movies or playing these computer games and how they interpret these animals in real life. The digital models we're creating can be input into models, animations in movies or computer games to give a realistic interpretation of what a shark not only looks like, but how it behaves. And hopefully portray the idea of these animals as much calmer, passive, and part of nature's ecosystems, not an aggressive killing machine. The third project that I'd like to talk to you today is where I've been deploying cameras at the bottom of the ocean. Now, I spoke a little bit about how to engage people in the threats that sea turtles are facing. And then I kind of tried to turn the focus the other way around. As opposed to looking for what an animal sees, try to get a close view of, say, a shark, so how we perceive sharks. Now, this is all about trying to build engagement, either engagement with these animals or engagement with the habitats or whatever. But a big issue is how do we get people to engage with the deep sea? The deep sea is the largest ecosystem on this planet. Over 70% of this planet is ocean, and over 70% of that ocean is below 1,000 meters deep, or has waters that are over 1,000 meters deep, which makes the deep sea the biggest ecosystem we have. But the problem, we often think of it as this kind of alien habitat. Like, none of us have any real connection with the deep sea. But the reality is the deep sea is threatened by the exact same issues that all the other oceans are. Climate change is a factor. Plastic pollution is a factor. We are fishing in these habitats, or fisheries are a factor. And if we want to start promoting conservation of the deep sea, we need a focal kind of point to start kind of selling that message, selling that conservation message. How do we get people engaged in the idea about the value of protecting the deep sea? And one way of doing that is by using what we call sometimes we call an umbrella species, like a charismatic species that people want to conserve. And because people want to conserve it, it protects all the other animals that live in that habitat. So if I said we need to protect the deep sea because there's a little funky little looking sea cucumber like this that's going extinct, you might not care. What about an animal that is really, really culturally important? In fact, probably one of the most culturally important species I can think of for millennia. There's a species that we've known about for centuries to millennia. It was mentioned in Greek mythology. It was mentioned in Norse mythology. They called it the kraken. We call it the giant squid. What I find fascinating is, while this is a species that you might see in books and movies and all these kind of culturally important media, we've very rarely seen them. And in fact, we've only ever seen giant squid alive twice in the entirety of history. First was a fantastic researcher called Dr. Edie Widder, got the first ever video of a live giant squid in the waters of Japan in 2012. And then last summer, I was lucky enough to work with Edie Widder when we were able to get the second ever footage, the first ever footage of a giant squid in US waters. And I recommend that people check it out. I'll drop a couple of links to some of the videos I'm talking about in the chats after I finished talking. I just recommend you check it out because it's a video that still takes my breath away to this day every time. I see it. It really did feel like being part of history, seeing that squid for the first time. I can only talk about, as a kid who grew up obsessed with the ocean and reading books on giant squid, what it was like to be the person who was able to see this animal for the second time in human history. It blows my mind. So thanks for letting me ramble on for a second. But getting back to the message, we got this footage, and once again, it was front page of New York Times, the story, like giant squid found in US waters. We managed to get covered by, I think it was over 400 different media outlets worldwide picking up this story. And this gave us an incredible platform to now start talking about the deep sea. And the message we actually tried to tell in most of our stories was not about this threatening monster that devours ships. This is all mythology. What we started talking about is, here's a species that's culturally important to us, that's part of our mythology. It's part of our media, our movies. It's something that like giant little kids draw in their books and dream about at night, and marine biologists, old marine biologists too, myself included. But it's incredibly species, but we know almost nothing about it. We've caught it on camera twice. We don't know how many there are. We don't really know where to find them, what depths in the water column they eat. We have some information about what they feed on, but not that much. And because we know so little, what I find very scary is this means we can actually lose this species. I don't know. No one can tell you whether giant squid populations are thriving right now or they're declining. Perhaps with the impact of climate change in the deep sea or plastic pollution in the deep sea, these species are getting pushed to the brink of extinction, and we don't even know. And I find that amazing. The species could, after impacting humanity for so long, could just blink out of existence without us even knowing. And that was the message we really tried to send. And it's wonderful. It's been able to start getting through to a lot of people. We're now to start able to talk about the deep sea and the value of the deep sea on a level that we weren't able to talk about before. And we're able to convince people of the importance of protecting these habitats, people who before might not have seen the purpose in protecting such habitats. Those are the three big stories that I wanted to talk to you about today. And as I said, I'm going to share some links. And if you look at the links, you'll see like the amount of like views and excitement that these videos have started to create. And I'm very proud when I talk about the real life conservation impacts in terms of people's behaviors, whether people use plastic, how people want to protect the oceans, how people want to treat the oceans and the life within it. I feel very proud knowing the impact that those videos have had on so many people. But I want to end on a message where I say, we all know that the problem's not over yet, right? So we still reading about the issues that are facing the oceans. Nothing's fixed. We still have an incredible amount of plastic going into the oceans every year. Climate change is going on unabated. And what I've been doing for the vast majority of my career, at least over the past few years, is trying to use new technologies to gain an insight into the natural world and use that as a platform for engaging people in conservation. But I'd like to take my whole story right back to the beginning, which was the story of the straw in the sea turtle's nose. That didn't involve dropping a camera to the bottom of the ocean or building a complex 3D model. That was filmed on a point and shoot camera because we saw something that people needed to see. And now, even more so than 5 years ago, everyone has a camera kind of sitting on their pocket or sitting in their hand all the time. That phone, the camera, gives you an incredibly important tool. It gives you the ability to tell a story. And telling stories, sharing the information that we see, is how we share our message and how we get people on board with these big movements that the ocean and our planet needs so much. If you see something that you don't like, whether it's in nature or in another aspect of your life, you have the tool to record that, share that, tell that story, and make a change. And if we all keep sharing these stories and all get excited, hopefully that'll make us so passionate that we want to make the necessary behavioral changes on the necessary scales to live in a cleaner ocean and a healthier ocean for the rest of our lives and the lives of the generations of people to come. Thank you. That was a lot of fun. It's kind of interesting to talk to a computer and just see yourself as opposed to having anyone else to interact with. But it's been nice to see some of the comments down the side. If anyone wants to learn more about the work I do, please check out my Instagram page, wild.blue.science, my YouTube page, Wild Blue Science. I think the links are down below. I'm also going to share some of the videos about the different projects I've been talking about, so please check those out too. And tell you what, I'll take a little bit of time to go through some of the questions if we have some nice questions. And I have to say thanks for your attention. Let's see. Hey, we have a lot of hellos, so hi back. It's a pleasure to see you all here. Hey, here's a fantastic question. If there are sperm whales in the Med, could there also be giant squid? So wherever there are sperm whales, there's food. Sperm whales are deep diving animals, and they tend to eat predominantly squid. Now, they don't just eat giant squid, they also eat lots of other squid. But here's the thing, we don't really know. There's been a couple of instances of giant squid being washed up in the Western Mediterranean, and we actually find them very common. They're one of the most common places in the world to see giant squid is on the north coast of Spain and around the Canary Islands. And that's where you find lots of carcasses kind of washed up on beaches or floating at the surface. So we assume those are some of the most high density areas for them. But in the Med, we don't really know if they're in there or if they've just kind of floated in there. That said, or currents are basically, taking like a carcass in the water. That said, we don't know for sure, and there's definitely big squid in the Med because we have sperm whales. So Sharkman Dan, that's a fantastic question. The best way to answer that is to get into the Med, get some cameras in the deep sea and see what we find. And hopefully, fingers crossed, I'll be able to do that with you guys when society opens back up again. Hey, here's another great one. Hey, what was the estimated size of the squid that was filmed? The squid that we filmed, we estimate to be about 4 to 8 meters long. We don't have a scale in the shot, so it's difficult to tell, but we can tell from our lure. So our lure is an optical light that creates a signal that is similar to a deep sea jellyfish. And we actually think that helps to attract the giant squid. And that's the same lure that's been used for both giant squid footage. The size of that, we were able to use that and the kind of perspective of the squid to estimate its size. We estimate it to be somewhere between 4 to 8 meters. So that's somewhere between, say, 12 to 24 feet. That is a baby, as a juvenile. Full-size giant squid will grow to 14 meters in length, so 42 feet. So what we saw was still huge. It was still at bare minimum, kind of 2 people standing on each other's shoulders, and it's still a baby as far as giant squid are concerned. Oh, here's a cool one. So any hints on the next project? We have a lot of stuff going on right now. We're hoping to do a lot more turtle cam stuff. We're actually hoping to do some turtle cam stuff in the Med, and we're hoping to do turtle cam stuff with the Fundación Oceanographic. Now, the Fundación Oceanographic runs a sea turtle rescue center. When sea turtles get caught in boats and brought to the surface, they can sometimes get decompression sickness, the bends. It's like if you were a scuba diver and came to the surface too quickly. So as fishers tend to bring the turtles to us at the rescue center, then we treat them, and then when they're healthy, we release them back into the oceans. I'm now really hoping to use the turtle cam to start to understand better how these animals readapt to life back in the wild. So after they've through rehabilitation, how they're able to, say, find food or where they're swimming and things like that. And we're hoping the turtle cams would be a fantastic way to answer that question. And the other project I'm super excited about is more giant squid stuff. We've just cracked the surface for kind of giant squid research. As I mentioned, we've only caught these animals on camera twice. And both times it was actually using the same camera and the same technology, the same optical lure I mentioned earlier. So we now think we have the perfect setup for capturing giant squid. The issue is, number one, that camera is now broken. And number two, it's pretty old technology. It's over 10 years old. So the resolution on the camera isn't as good as it could be today. So one of the projects I'm really excited about is in about a week's time, I'm going to release a crowdfunding campaign to help build a brand new state-of-the-art deep sea camera that hopefully will then be able to start working with the Save the Med guys and people elsewhere around the world, deploying it in areas where we think there are giant squid to try to get more footage of these elusive animals to start to unlock more mysteries about what they're feeding on, where to find them, and all their behaviors that we know nothing about. Hey, here's another question. Besides creative contents like videos and photos, what other way would you recommend to engage the public? I often think that one of the best ways to if you want to engage public on a global scale, then you've got to think global. You've got to think something that's going to engage lots of people. And we're all online and we all have Facebook now, we all have Instagram and social media and all that jazz. So if you want to talk on a huge kind of global scale, those are the kind of tools you have to be working with. But if you're talking about engaging people, if you're talking about engaging people, the building blocks of making behavioral change, the individual, right? So it's about making individual changes. So if you want to talk about engaging people, the best way to engage people is just one-on-one conversation. And this is not finding someone with a straw and pulling it out of their drink and throwing it and stamping it on the ground and shouting something derogative and walking away. This is actually talking to people and explaining people, do you know the facts? Do you know why we don't need single-use plastic, or why we can reduce our dependence on single-use plastic and what benefit this would have to do? That is an incredibly powerful way to engaging people. And if you can make that individual change through a one-on-one conversation that can make someone completely change, then that's better than 1,000,001 likes. That's the real impact. So that's my answer to that question. What's another animal that you dream about filming? This is this is not going to be the biggest. My answer for this question isn't going to be entirely out of left field. Some people might expect this, but not everyone knows that the giant squid actually isn't the biggest squid in the ocean. The biggest squid in the ocean is called the colossal squid, and it's found in the waters of the Southern Ocean. So the polar oceans at the bottom of the world, it grows to around 16 meters, so about 2 meters bigger than a giant squid. It has a much chunkier body, and another kind of scary adaptation that it has is giant squid have all these suckers running all the way down their tentacles. Giant squid have tiny little teeth that when they suck on, they can also use those teeth, those claws, to kind of hold on to their prey. What's scary about colossal squid is they don't have lots of tiny teeth, they have one big hook. So you're talking about a 16-meter animal with tentacles covered in kind of finger-sized hooks and all that stuff. No one has seen one alive in their natural habitat to date for several reasons. They're incredibly difficult to film, as we know with giant squid, but what's even more difficult about the colossal squid is where they're found. Southern Ocean has some of the biggest storms, biggest waves. It's cold. You're just north of South Pole. So it's a very difficult habitat to access. But the rewards would be amazing. To get the first ever footage of a colossal squid, that would be a dream of mine. And I'd be happy to deal with the cold and the waves on the boat to have the opportunity to try to get footage of those incredible animals. Okay, do you notice that some people don't want to see disturbing footages of suffering wildlife as a way to protect themselves from feeling bad about it? how could you make them feel more concerned? So thank you, Laura. That's another great question. Some people respond to kind of shocking imagery, right? The straw is a shocking video, and it's not a pleasant video to watch, but it spoke to people. It's kind of gut-wrenching, and it got a lot of people engaged. But what I try to do in my research is I'm not just out there trying to find the next shocking image of here's the worst thing you can think of. Here's a sperm whale eating plastic. Here's another animal being killed for food. You can also kind of promote behavioral changes by sharing good images. And the turtle cam stuff, which I thoroughly recommend people check out because it's beautiful, is a great example of this. The turtle cam project, we conducted it in the Bahamas. We conducted it in the Bahamas for a great reason, which is the waters are crystal clear. And in most of the habitats we were working, there's almost no plastic. So we weren't getting footage of a turtle swimming in between lumps of plastic and all this stuff. We're actually getting footage of a turtle swimming in a relatively pristine habitat, and it's jaw-droppingly beautiful. It's wonderful stuff to watch, and people love it. So you don't have to convince people with heartbreaking stories. You can actually start to convince people about the beauty of the ocean and the story of, come on, like, how much do you enjoy this? You want to live in a planet where this exists, and if you conduct these behaviors, this is no longer going to happen. And that can also be a very powerful way to engage people in marine conservation. So that's my recommendation. You don't just have to tell the bad stories. The good ones are just as important. Jasmine has a question. Do you have a theory on how the straw ended up in the sea turtle's nose wasn't mistaken for food? Yes. I have a theory, and I'm pretty sure I'm right for this, and I think you're right as well. It was mistaken for food. When we first saw the straw, we couldn't quite figure out, like, it was literally flush with the nose when we found it, and the straw was kind of hard and rigid. It spent a lot of time in the ocean, and we couldn't think how a turtle could keep kind of hitting something until it got so far wedged in its nostril. So it was a bit of a mystery for a while. But then when we started thinking about it, we started thinking, well, okay, well, how about maybe it came from the other direction? Maybe the animal swallowed something and then tried to regurgitate it because it was plastic, and it got stuck in the nose. It's kind of like, sorry, it's kind of gross, but the idea that, you drink milk, someone makes you laugh, it shoots out your nose. Like, all the pipes are connected back there. That was our hypothesis. Then, about 2 months after we saw the straw video, after we had the straw encounter, we had a very similar encounter. I was actually working on a different area in Costa Rica, but nearby, about 50 kilometers down the coast. And we found a sea turtle, but this time it had a plastic fork lodged in its nose. And if you just type sea turtle fork, you can also see that video. What was incredibly kind of eye-opening about that was the fork, this fork, wasn't wedged this way around, it was wedged this way around, with the tines, the head of the fork, inside the nostril. And all we could see when we first came up to the turtle was this bit sticking out. And there's no way on earth that whole head of the fork could have got wedged inside this animal's nostril from this end. The only way this could have happened is if the animal swallowed it, tried to regurgitate it, and it got stuck in its nose. Now, what's really interesting about that is inside a sea turtle's throat, you have all these spines, and it helps them when they eat their prey. It stops their prey coming up. But the idea was that because of that, sea turtles can't regurgitate stuff because it just gets trapped in these spines. But what we're showing is that can't be the case, because that's what we think is happening with these items. And that brings me on to another part of the story, which is all the plastic that you might hear about in the oceans. And you might hear about studies where they found a dead sea turtle and you open up its stomach and there's lots of plastic inside it, is only a fraction of the plastic they're probably encountering. There's a lot of plastic that they might be eating, they might just be passing through them, but also they might be regurgitating. They might be able to get a lot of this stuff out. So it just really helps to show there's a lot more plastic out there than we even think, and we think there's a lot of plastic already. If a turtle, okay, Luca asked the question, if a turtle swallows plastic, how much percent probability does he have to survive without any human interference or help? That kind of loops perfectly to my last question. So thanks, my last answer. So thanks for asking. The honest answer to that question is we don't know. A sea turtle, some sea turtles, much like a human, like you could swallow, or some. I probably shouldn't say this, but I'm saying you could, by accident, swallow a plastic, whatever, something, and for some of us, it will just pass right through. The same thing goes to the sea turtle. There's a lot of plastic in the ocean that they're swallowing that probably passes right through them. So there's no, if a sea turtle swallows plastic, their percentage of increasing, the percentage of dying increases X amount. We don't have a number. In fact, we're still, as a scientific community, trying to understand the impact that plastic is having. We know that there are sea turtles and whales and birds and all these things dying because of plastic, but how many is a complicated question. It gets even more complicated when you think that you can find dead animals that have plastic inside them, but you don't know whether they died because of the plastic inside them or they died for another reason and they just had plastic inside them. So it's the short way is we know there's a bad impact of plastic inside an animal, but we don't know exactly how much. So it's difficult to give you a straight kind of value answer. Is TikTok next? I imagine that's how you get those younger viewers to engage and become aware of ocean issues. Thank you, Alyssa, for that comment. Is TikTok next? I don't know. I think I might be too old for TikTok at this point, but who knows? Maybe I'll develop one in the next couple of days so I can start sharing some of these stories. Because as I said, right at the beginning, the way you get people to engage nowadays is social media, and that's the big platform. So who knows? Maybe that's the future. Okay, so I think that's all the questions that we have listed. So I just want to thank everyone so much for tuning in. It was an absolute pleasure. Just before I go, I'm going to share a couple of YouTube links below that anyone can click on. So this is a couple of links for the straw videos or videos about the sharks or videos about the giant squid, anything like that. So I'll just share that now and then I'll leave you all to have a wonderful evening. There you go. There's straw. There's turtle cam. There's the sharks. There's the giant squid. Right. Have a wonderful evening. I love you all. And yes, keep checking out all of Save the Meds fantastic stuff they have online. They've got great stuff and great talks. So give them a follow and see you guys around.